Okay. Hey, everybody. So my name is Eliza Bliss-Moreau, and I am an associate professor in the psych department. And I'm excited to be here with you all today to talk a little bit about what you can do this summer if you're thinking about applying to graduate school next fall. I've had a couple of tech issues in getting going, even though I was teaching on Zoom all day. So thanks for bearing with us as I grabbed a second computer to talk to you on today. I thought what I would do would be to talk for about 20 minutes about sort of process-oriented details. And Stacy, you've got the admits from the waiting room, right? You'll monitor that. Cool. Talk for about 20 minutes about process-oriented details and kind of ways that you can think about things you can think about doing over the course of the summer to get yourself prepared to apply to graduate school in the fall. And then we'll just open it up for questions. The genesis of this is that I am involved in a number of different undergraduate mentoring programs for science on campus, and have had conversations with students in those programs over the last few weeks about kind of how they should get organized for graduate school applications, and was kind of struck by the fact that these are students who are in these, in general, like more formalized research programs, and they're getting a lot of kind of support in this realm. And it occurred to me that there's probably a lot of other students that are our majors out there who might benefit from having a conversation about how you get organized to apply to graduate school. So if there aren't any questions as we head off, if you have questions during a little presentation, feel free to throw them up into the chat, and then we can start there when we get to question and answer. So if you think of things, go ahead and throw them up in the chat box, and we'll answer them in due time. So let me share my screen. Okay, everyone can see the PowerPoint, hopefully. Yes, Stacy, good. See the, cool. Okay. So what we're going to talk about today is how to use your summer to prepare for graduate school applications. And I want to be clear that we're talking about research-based programs today. So this includes master's degrees and PhDs, including a clinical PhD, but not the sort of applied counseling or clinical degrees that many people think of and are interested in as their next step, like marriage and family therapy, or master's in social work, or a PsyD, which is a professional doctorate in psychology. So when we're talking about this sort of, there's similarities in the sort of trajectories as you're preparing these applications, but I'm really focused on the research-based master's degree and PhDs. And in part, that's because that's where I have expertise. That my trajectory was one of these sorts of trajectories. And it's a trajectory that we're kind of most often training students in my lab. So I think it's always helpful to know a little bit about the people who are talking to you and how they got to where they got when we're talking about these professional development sort of questions. And so my own journey into graduate school and beyond actually seems kind of linear and maybe even well planned from the, I can tell a story basically that makes it seem linear and well planned, but it actually really wasn't. And I had no idea what I was doing as I was applying to grad school. I actually didn't even apply, which you'll see in a second. I just stayed in the lab where I was doing undergraduate research. So when I tell students, whether they're my students in my own lab or in my classes, or I'm talking with a group like you all, I say kind of do what I say, but maybe not what I did. Although things worked out for me well, I think that there were a lot of opportunities that I probably missed, and you can set yourself up to pursue a whole variety of things with just a little bit of planning. So I did research as an undergrad for all 4 years. I actually worked as a research coordinator in my 4th year. I went to Boston College, and that helped pay for my 4th year of school. And I thought that I was med school bound. So I did all the pre-med curriculum, I took the MCAT, and I applied the first round of applications, and then realized that I really didn't want to do that. And so I then thought that I would work for a little while and maybe then go to med school later. But my senior year was when September 11th happened and the economy crashed and there were kind of no jobs to be found. And so my mentor, my research mentor, offered me the option of staying in her lab to do a master's degree. And there wasn't a master's program at this school. The idea was that I'd stay in the PhD program and then I'd leave with a master's degree and go on to med school or whatever was kind of next. And ultimately I ended up staying and completing a PhD in social psychology. So I am now in biopsychology because I came to UC Davis in 2008 for a postdoc. So that's the training that happens after a PhD in monkey neuroscience. And in a very kind of weird twist of fate and the stars aligning, I ended up staying in a faculty position at UC Davis as well. It's pretty unusual. So one thing to note is that I've really only been at 2 institutions for all of my training. So I did my undergrad and my PhD at Boston College, and then all of my postdoc and my faculty work has been at UC Davis. So I'm familiar with kind of private schools and public schools, but I don't have a huge breadth of experience with different institutions. So there are a lot of different paths to grad school, and my path is only one example, and it's not one that I particularly recommend because, like I said, I think that I probably would have had a lot of different options and could have moved or studied something different, but it's one path. What I want to talk to you about today are some of the steps that I think are kind of consistent across different paths. So the first thing to think of and kind of be aware of is what programs you're actually keen to apply to. And the first step, if you're headed in a research direction, is to think about a master's degree versus a PhD. So master's programs in psych and related fields like neuro and anthro are not really terminal degrees insofar as they don't prepare you for a profession per se. They're often used as sort of building blocks or jumping off points to more education, whether that's a PhD or sometimes people go on to medical school or PsyDs or this sort of thing. You've got 2 options. They're kind of interchangeable: Masters of Science, which is an MS, and a Masters of Arts, which is an MA. How those are issued really just depends on your institution, and it doesn't really make a difference. So there's no greater value on an MS than an MA. But you should just be aware that both of the MS and MA terminology refer to master's degrees. Master's degrees are good if you are not totally sure what you want to study. So when you commit to a PhD, you commit to a much longer time frame, and masters are relatively short. So I, for example, have a master's student in my group who had kind of general sense of his topics of interest, but not a really specific sense that would allow him to get into a PhD program or kind of find the right lab. So he's doing a master's degree in my group to get a better sense of the field and what he wants to do next. They're also really helpful if you need to enhance your package before you apply to PhD programs, or MDs or MSWs or PsyDs or other JDs, etc. And so when I say enhanced package, we'll talk a little bit about kind of requirements and grades and stuff, but if there's a sort of issue with your educational background or your experience that's going to hang you up from getting into a PhD program, you can often just fix that by going to do a master's and doing well in the master's program, and then people kind of don't care about how well you've done as an undergrad in general. Alone, so if you just do a master's, you don't go on to other things, they can improve your job prospects and income. We pay, in my group, master's level folks better than folks who just have an undergraduate degree. So there are some opportunities to have a sort of research, be involved in scientific research and have a research career with just a master's degree, but often they launch people onto these other degrees. It takes about 2 years to do a master's degree full-time. They're often part-time options. And they're not typically funded, meaning you're not going to be paid to go to school, although some programs offer TA-ships. So, for example, I'm associated with the Animal Biology Master's Program, and if students have come from our Animal Science program or other animal science programs and they've done really well, they can TA, and that provides them with a stipend every month. PhD programs in psychology, kind of in contrast, are generally more competitive to get into than a master's degree. They're a much longer time commitment. So we've seen in our program some people graduating in 3.5 and 4 years, but they're often time to degree is 5 or 6 years. And in the biological sciences, and particularly monkey science, which is very slow, it's not unusual for people to take 7 years to finish their PhD. I've completed mine in 6. PhD programs are they should be funded exclusively and stipended, meaning you don't pay tuition and you also get a cost of living stipend every month. It's not amazing money, but it's supposed to be able to support you. I think on our campus, in the sciences, the stipends range from like $2,400 to $2,500 a month to like $2,900 a month, kind of depending on the program. So all these things are considerations when you're picking a program. Another thing is that you can master out of a PhD program. So you wouldn't want to necessarily apply to a PhD program with just the goal of getting a master's degree. But if you're in a PhD program and your goals change, or you have to move, or there's something comes up in your life, you can actually finish a master's degree and cut out of the program, in 2 or 3 years. And that's not, I would say it's not, you wouldn't want to plan for that, but if that needs to happen, it's good to know that that is an option in most programs. Okay, so general to-dos. And I've structured this kind of in thinking about if I was going into my senior year or my final year of university, and I was thinking about applying to grad school in the fall, what are the things that I would want to accomplish over the summer? So whether or not you're going to do a master's degree or a PhD, you need to have a scientific topic of interest. This is the kind of broad category of information. It's a broad theme that you're going to study. You don't have to have really specific hypotheses. In fact, many of us who are training graduate students aren't looking for people with really specific ideas. We are really interested in people who have kind of general interest in the sort of work that we're doing. You also need to find a mentor or a program. And these are actually different but related. So we'll talk a little bit about different types of models for PhD training. But ultimately, in most master's, scientific research-based master's programs, and essentially all PhD programs, you are nested into a mentor's lab, and that mentor is associated with a PhD program. So you apply to a program to work with a specific person, or to a program with a couple of different people in mind. And I'll talk a little bit about that in a second. You also want to figure out what the specific application requirements are, because they're actually fairly variable across programs. So not all programs require the GRE. Not all programs require that you have even official transcripts sent to them. Some programs require more than 2 essays. Some programs require different numbers of letters of recommendation, but you want to figure this all out ahead of time so that you can kind of keep track of what you're doing in terms of applications. You can also start preparing your applications over the summer, working on essays and getting things in line so that you can get lots of feedback on them. And ultimately, even asking for letters of recommendation over the summer is a good idea. You may be told, follow up with me again when the term starts, because many of us are working either exclusively in our labs over the summer or not working, because we're only paid 9 months a year, most of us. So just be aware you might be asked to be back in touch, but reaching out really early is a good thing. So these are the sort of to-dos to get applications in order. And then they rest on this other foundation of all the work that you've already done, but may need to do a little bit more of in order to position yourself well to get into graduate school. And that includes having some research experience, having decent grades. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. Having tailored application essays that are really kind of specific to the lab you want to work in and the person you want to work with, and then having strong letters of recommendation. And so you can still do things about those foundational blocks the summer before you apply to grad school, even in the fall as you're applying to grad school. But it's worth just being aware that the sort of individual steps in terms of getting organized to apply to graduate school rest on this foundation of work you've already done. So I'm going to talk mostly focus on these top things in the circles today, but I want to touch briefly on the bottom squares just to kind of give an overview of the sorts of things we're looking for in people's records. So there is an increasing emphasis on the whole applicant. And what we mean by that is that increasingly, and this is certainly the way I do things in my group, I'm looking at a person's entire application and I'm trying to contextualize the various elements of it. And so what this means is that you don't have to have perfect grades to get into a PhD program. You can even have kind of bad grades in a couple of years if you've turned things around and have good grades towards the end of training. You don't have to have perfect GRE scores. You don't have to have, we're not checking we don't have like a checklist and we're going through and looking for all these things. What we're looking for is a person who's, and I guess I can only speak for myself, but people who have real scientific excitement and have a sense of the sort of questions that they want to study and know that those questions are similar to the sort of questions that I'm asking in my group. So one thing on your record is unlikely to really count against you. So I have accepted students who have had a year of really horrible grades, like low C's and D's, but they've turned things around. And to me, seeing those grade trajectories means that people are working hard to figure out the sort of work that they like and they want to be doing, and also working to learn how to study and these sorts of things. If you're a standout in one domain though, so let's say you have perfect grades or perfect GRE scores, and the other domains are really, really weak, so you've got horrible letters of reference, for example, that's not great either, because we're really emphasizing kind of the whole student. A note about GREs. So the GRE is the graduate record exam, and it used to be required kind of universally across the board for admission to graduate programs. And that's increasingly becoming not the case. So there's quite a bit of evidence that how well people do on their GRE doesn't predict their long-term outcomes. And there's a lot of debate around including versus not including the GRE. I can tell you myself, my GRE scores were horrible, absolutely horrible. And they are consistent with a learning disability that I had not had diagnosed until, and I didn't have identified until the very, very end of graduate school. So the GRE was really assessing my test anxiety and not my ability to perform. And based on my GRE scores, I also took the MCAT, and I actually did much better on the MCAT than I did on the GRE. But based on the GRE and the MCAT scores, I had been told that I would, never write well and never succeed in science and all these different things, and it has kind of no bearing on my success whatsoever. So I think, we've eliminated the GRE in the UC Davis psych program last year because of COVID. We've just voted to eliminate it again for this next year, also because of COVID, because there are places in the world that are not offering it because the pandemic is still raging, especially in Southeast Asia. And so you should just be aware that you may or may not need the GRE, and part of the reason to figure out where you're going to apply ahead of time is to know if you're going to need to take it. Okay, so research experience. I get asked a lot if research experience is required to go to graduate school. And I don't think it's required, but it's definitely useful. And it's useful for a variety of reasons. So the first and probably most important is that it can help shape your interests and help you figure out what you're interested in and also not interested in, which is equally important. And getting a sense of research from graduate students, if there are grad students in a lab, will also give you a sense of what grad school is like. So the undergrads who work in my group get nested onto a research team, and they work either with our graduate students or our postdocs. Sometimes people work directly with me. We actually try strategically to have students work with the junior members of the lab so that they get a sense of what life is like to be in graduate school or at one of these junior levels of training. It's also the case that research mentors, whether those people are the graduate students, the postdocs, project scientists, or faculty in a lab, can typically write much stronger letters of recommendation for you than faculty who you might have had in your classroom classes. So if I teach 200 students, which I do pretty regularly, I get to know students, some in office hours, but even the students who I get to know really, really well in office hours, I don't know as well as the undergraduates who are working in my lab. And that's not just because those students are doing work that I know in the lab, but it's because they're physically around a lot, even in Zoom times, We're having conversations through our digital communication platforms about projects. I get to see how they think and how they kind of carry out work, and that's super useful. Research mentors can also connect you with your networks. So it's often the case that I have students who work with me and they are keen to study similar topics. They either don't want to work with monkeys or they want to move somewhere. And I'm often able to say, hey, my science sister is at UNC Chapel Hill. Maybe you should go consider working with her, this sort of thing. Okay, a note about grades. Grad school, so grades tell us something about academicness, and it's not totally clear what. So, there's variability across institutions and how grading unfolds. Not all A's have the same sort of kind of value, but we want to see that you've gotten decent marks because it indicates that you have learned how to study and you've learned how to kind of navigate the academic system. And ideally they should be high and stable. That's good, but also improving trajectories are really important. And when I interview students, I'll often ask about that. So it looked like your freshman year was super hard, but then your grades have gotten much better. What's going on? And often we'll find that students started in one major that they really hated, or they just had a rocky transition to university, and then found their passion and are doing really well. So if you don't have perfect grades, don't worry, graduate school can still be an option for you. If you have poor grades, taking some time to take an additional class is an option, or moving towards a master's degree to kind of beef up your record, that can really help. And just be aware that some places actually have like GPA guidelines. So some of the more competitive programs will say, on average, our students come in with a 3.6, and it's unlikely you'll be considered if it's lower. We don't have strict cutoffs at Davis, although in general, if you have an undergraduate GPA below a 3.0, it's harder to get TA shows. Okay, tailored essays. Most graduate school apps will ask you to write an essay about you and then an essay about the work that you want to do. And it's super important to tailor this because we as faculty are using these essays to figure out who's interested in the work that we're doing, and who might be a good fit scientifically for the team. And when I say fit, I mean very specifically the applicant's scientific interests and the work that we're doing, that those two things need to mesh. Tailoring your essays to specific research programs or faculty or institutes is a very good idea, and everybody should do it. You want to write about what the work that they're doing and why you're interested in it. You want to write about how your ideas fit with their papers or talks or materials that you can find. You don't want to just write a long thing about your interests that may or may not be related to what the faculty do. Okay, strong letters of rec. So most applications require letters of recommendations, and the better the letter writer knows you, typically the stronger the letter will be. Generally, these should come from faculty who can speak to your scientific capacity if you're applying for a research-based PhD. Although I've also seen really great recommendation letters from people who have worked in a clinical setting that's directly relevant to the work we do. So the work in my lab is mostly with non-human animals, and I have seen letters of rec come from, for example, veterinarians who are overseeing vet techs and talk about their passion and acumen for working with animals. But in general, you want them to be scientifically focused. Ask early. We are all busy and we often write tons of letters. So I wrote, I think, 28 letters, so not 28 letters, but I wrote letters for 28 people for research masters and PhDs in the fall, and I wrote letters for 10 vet med students and 10 medical students this spring. And so we need a lot of time, and I'll talk about that in the timeline. And it can take a while to write a letter, and for those of us who really like to tailor them to our students, well, I may go back and forth with the student a bunch of times to make sure I've included the right information. You want to ask what the letter writer would like in advance, like a CV or resume, transcripts, personal statements, and how, if you're applying to a bunch of schools, how they want that information organized. And then follow up like a week before the deadline, make sure that we've submitted them. Okay, so I want to turn my attention to these sort of 5 steps to things to do this summer if you're thinking about applying to grad school in the fall. And the first is, I was going to say maybe the most important, but actually I think they're all, the first couple are pretty important. So the first thing is that you want to find a specific topic of interest. So some of you may know already, like, I want to study this one thing, and that's fantastic. But if you don't, you need to figure out kind of the specific direction you're headed in. And it needs to be specific. So saying, I want to study cognition is actually not sufficient, because there are many different aspects of cognition. So there's attention, learning, memory. Similarly, I want to study emotion. Cool. You want to study emotion perception or emotion experience? Do you want to study it across the lifespan or in small children? You know, all these questions are really, really important. You also want to think about the level of analysis, whether you want to work in behavior, in the brain, whether that's neuroimaging or histology, whether you want to study things at the level of social groups, whether you want to work with humans or non-human animals. And you may have flexibility in your thinking, like, hey, anything related to brain and behavior, but specifically about learning is fine. And that's totally fine too, but you want to kind of get a sense of this. The way that I suggest that folks who don't have a clear idea of specific questions develop them is to start doing a literature search. So get on Google Scholar and PubMed and type in some keywords of interest and start reading. So don't just look, but actually read people's work. Read the abstracts initially, cruise the introductions, and get a sense of, like, is this exciting to me? Kind of what sparks my curiosity and my interest and my intrigue. Keep track of those papers. You might even organize them into like a super cool, kind of cool, not so cool folder system on your computer, because ultimately you're going to go back to those papers and figure out where those authors are and if they are taking students. So you want to look for papers of interest. You want to find the people who are doing the work, because those people are potential mentors. In general, in psychology, the senior faculty will be either in the first author position or the last author position. Increasingly, the senior author, so the person whose lab it is in the last author position. So you need to do some legwork and kind of search out who the different authors on a paper are and what their different positions are. Then you have to think about mentors and programs. So you want your mentor and program to be consistent with your academic interests, and you want to make sure that the current work is interesting to you. So for example, I spent my PhD working with humans, and I spent the first part of my postdoc working with animals that had neonatal brain damage, and I don't do that work anymore. That's just how it goes. For a whole variety of reasons. So we do work a little with humans, but I don't typically accept students who are only interested in working with humans, because we just don't have enough of that work going on. I always have students apply to me who only want to work with humans, and it's because they haven't sorted out what our current work is. Be aware that there are two types of PhD programs. So there's mentor-based, and our psych program at Davis is like this. So you apply to work with a specific person. And then there's rotation-based. The neuroscience program at Davis is like this. You apply to the program. You spend the first year trying out different labs, and then you and the mentors pick, kind of, it's like speed dating for science, kind of. Rotation-based is less common in psychology. The reality is, in either of these programs, you want to make sure that you've picked a mentor or mentors, and that there are people who are there that do the sort of work you want to do. And that's because ultimately you're going to end up in these people's labs. You're going to work very, very, very closely with them. I tell my own students all the time that picking a mentor for graduate training is one of the few times in life you get to pick your family, because if everything goes well, you end up with these people for the long term. So my PhD mentor, who I met 23 years ago, still writes letters for me. She advises me on career aspect things. She advises me on how to train my own students. She's really become an extended part of my family. That's not the case for everyone, but you definitely will have these sort of long-term relationships. And it's worth being aware that it's not just picking a mentor who's kind of a parental figure. I don't mean it in a sort of paternalistic way, but the person's going to guide you through the process of a PhD. But also many research laboratories, all research laboratories have a culture and a feel. And in many cases, students end up becoming really close, and they become friends, and they support each other's work and so forth. And so labs kind of can be thought of as families. They have family dynamics and stuff as well too, and the mentor is kind of responsible for overseeing And so the culture of the lab or the program is really important, and it's really important for you to try to figure out, you would do this kind of by talking to graduate students or during the interview process, figure out if it's a good fit for you. Okay, so look up the authors of the papers you found in order to find a mentor or a program. Ask your mentors and your professors for suggestions. So I teach emotion and I teach advanced animal behavior, and I often get emails from students who are really interested in something and say, hey, I'd really like to go to grad school and study X. Do you have any suggestions of people I might apply to work with? And I can send through some names of, oh yeah, my friend so-and-so is doing this, or I read this paper by this other person and this might be a good fit, check this out. Do your research on those people, like I talked about a little bit before. Read their website, including a look to see if they have current students, which is sometimes an indicator if they're take students. Figure out what their current work is by reading their recent papers. And then these two websites are the NIH and the NSF awards websites. So research is funded. Some research is very expensive. The work that happens in my lab because of the monkeys is very expensive. And so you could go to NIH Reporter and type in my last name and you would see our currently funded work. And that's a really good indication of what we're doing right now. You could also do an archival search and see the work that we've completed. And maybe that would give it good information. In our case, it would, because we're kind of revisiting the same themes, but you should consider looking mentors up to see what their current funding situation is. A lab that's really well funded is also likely to be able to kind of easily fund your PhD. In general, there are some exceptions to that, but it's worth being aware. You want to figure out what programs people train graduate students in. So in some cases, like where I came from, each department had a graduate program. Davis and many of the UCs are super interdisciplinary. And so there is a psych graduate group, and it is largely configured with faculty from the psych department. But there are also these interdisciplinary graduate groups that don't map to departments. Like I'm associated with animal biology, animal behavior, and neuroscience, and there aren't those specific departments on campus. You should also see if there are instructions for students, whether people are taking students and if they post any instructions about interacting. And this is a really important clue, and it's super useful to look for before you reach out. And then you can contact them to see if they're taking students. So by way of illustration, if you go to my website, which is blissmoreaulab.ucdavis.edu, we have a tab that's called Joining Us. And the first thing you'll see is for undergraduate students, but then if you scroll down the page, there's this blurb about grad students. So you'll note that I haven't updated this yet because we haven't decided if we're going to accept students in the next cycle. But I tell you that we are associated with these 4 grad programs, and I link out to them because they each have different degree requirements. So psych, animal behavior, neuroscience, and animal biology. Only animal biology offers a master's degree, which is important. I give a little bit of information about what we do and kind of how we work. And then this is super important. So at the bottom, I have an indication about contact, and you'll see this more and more. So it reads that I often receive requests from potential students to discuss projects and applications, and I don't do that anymore. So I used to have kind of extended conversations with people before applications went in. And what I found is that I think that was strategically disadvantaging students who didn't know to reach out and talk to faculty members, and that we got a more diverse and more variable applicant pool when I didn't do that. And because when I did that, I would then key in on people who I thought were very good, and I'd kind of miss everybody else. So for reasons related to equity and inclusion, I do not talk to students before applications anymore, but I'm always happy for people to reach out and say, hey, I'm interested in applying to your group. I'm specifically interested in your Alzheimer's work. Will you be taking students to work on that project? And I can say yes or no, but we have this other thing that you might be interested in. So that sort of communication is totally fine, but I don't have extended conversations. Nevertheless, even with this disclaimer on my website, I get paragraph emails regularly with people asking me to talk to them and review their application materials, and sometimes even getting really ticked off when I'm not willing to do that. So just be aware that many of us, for equity reasons, have stopped doing this pre-application communication. Okay, so if you're making contact, send a brief note asking if they're taking students, indicate your interest relative to their work. it's helpful to include a CV or resume. I often get it emailed by students who have GPAs that are below 2.0, and I know for certain that that is not going to fly in the psych program, even if their application is otherwise great, because it's just not competitive enough. And so that allows me to provide some other suggestions about what they might do. Clarifying questions are great. Is this your current work? Are you affiliated with this program? Especially if it shows that you've done a little bit of legwork and research on what we do. Do not send like a multi-paragraph email, and do not focus. So focus on what of their work you're interested in and not your own ideas. So we are interested in people whose ideas align with what we're doing, because we have kind of constrained, I think in general, constrained programs. There are some exceptions to this, but in general, we want to know that we're going to be in a position to train you. With very few exceptions, you want to identify multiple mentors or programs. And the exception is if you work with a mentor already and that person is able to commit to take you. And that was the situation I was in. So my mentor knew she had a slot when I was graduating, and she committed to take me even before I had applied. And in part, that's because I was working for her as a research coordinator. That's super unusual. And so you generally want to apply to multiple things. Okay. Figure out specific application requirements. So go to the websites and see what's required. There's variation in requirements. Do you have to send official transcripts? Are the GREs required? How many rec letters? How many essays and what topics? I have helped a student in my group get organized with just a spreadsheet that she made like this, and then also she sent me, which was super useful because I could see who she was applying to work with at the different schools and the dates that my letters of rec were due. So you might consider an organization like that. And finally, you can start preparing your application over the summer. So you can start drafting essays, and you can look for sources of feedback. So are there faculty that you've studied with that would be willing to take a look at your essays in the fall? Are there grad students or other advisors? You can get organized and ask for reference letters. So people may tell you to get back in touch in the fall, and that's totally fine, but sending an email that says, hey, I'm going to be applying to graduate school, and I'm hoping you might be willing to write a letter of reference for me this fall. And doing that over the summer to us shows that you've like really gotten everything together, which is great. You can use the summer to fill holes or set up opportunities to do so in the fall. So I'm often contacted by students looking for a research experience for the fall because they're planning to apply and they feel like they don't have enough research experience. That's totally fine. You can study for and take the GRE if required. And I highly recommend doing this when you're not in class. And then the other thing to do is to figure out if you are eligible for either fellowships or fee waivers for application fees. This varies by university. There are typically fees associated with applying, but they're often waived under a whole variety of circumstances. And that would be something to know up front because that might impact the number of institutions you apply for. Okay, final thing, asking for letters of rec. So like I said, it's never too early to ask, and just send a brief email indicating that you plan to apply, and would the person be willing to write a letter of recommendation. So don't assume that they'll be willing to write a letter of recommendation. Ask if they would first. There are a variety of reasons that people say no that have nothing to do with you, being out on maternity leave, or having care commitments that they're on sabbatical, this sort of thing. If they're willing, then you want to ask them what information they'd like from you and when. So I always ask for a resume, a CV, unofficial transcripts, and then if available, personal statements, so I can really tailor the letters. Okay, and so that's the 5-step process. I should have had a review slide at the end, but those things can be accomplished over the summer. And if you kind of work through those things over the summer, by the time you get to fall, you'll be able to spend your time tailoring your applications and focusing on your studies so you finish your university curriculum strong, and hopefully apply successfully to graduate school. So I'm happy to open up to questions. I will actually end the slideshow and take questions.
The first question that was posted is, for letters of rec, would it be appropriate to ask a current PhD student who is your lab mentor or lab manager?
Good question. So in general, so yes, but I would ask the PhD student and the faculty member, and maybe email them both. So it is often the case that the PhD students who are working with students, like in my lab, for example, know the student really well, sometimes even better than I do, often better than I do if they've only been in the group for a little while. And so in those cases, I actually write the letters with my PhD students and we both sign them. And mentors have different sorts of processes for this, and it's kind of variable, but what that allows us to do is twofold. So it allows us to have more information from the PhD student, but there's a signature from a faculty member, which as a faculty member, I'm kind of looking for. And then also it allows a faculty member to train graduate students to write letters of recommendation. So definitely ask the PhD students, but I would ask them with the faculty member. Let's see. There's a, please return back to the slides.
I just posted a link to the handout for Annie.
Great.
And then the next question is from Safa.
So I believe you mentioned earlier you went to Boston College for master's and thinking about applying there for tips, master's in counseling. So I went to Boston College for my undergraduate degree, my bachelor's, and I did a biology and psychology double major, and then for my PhD. I don't know what their admissions universe looks like right now, but their master's, I think their counseling is in the School of Education. It has an excellent program. And I'm friends with a whole bunch of people who did that program at the same time I was working on my PhD. So I don't have specific tips for applying there. I would say that it's a really great institution with a very, very strong commitment to social justice, which may be of interest. It was certainly of interest to me. And it's a very cool place to live in the world, which is not real helpful in terms of your application, but it would. Yeah, okay, next question. I noticed the presentation included clinical psychology, but so clinical psychology PhDs are research PhDs, and they follow the same trajectory as any other research PhD. At the end of them, people do a one-year internship where they get additional clinical training, and then they get licensed after that. So that is different from counseling psychology, and I actually can't even speak to what a counseling psychology PhD would look like. But a clinical PhD is one of, if not the most competitive PhD programs to get into, just generally speaking. And everybody who finishes the sort of clinical psychology PhD has the 6 years or 5 years of research in addition to clinical practice. So it's different, distinctly different from a counseling PhD. Really good question. Does a prestigious graduate school matter? If not, what does matters most? So yes and no. No. So I believe people will tell you different things, but I believe very, very strongly that your mentor matters absolutely the most, because you are training with that person for a long time, and they're not just training you in content, but they're also training you how to think. And so you like really want that relationship to be a good one, and you want to be like, you are basically, by training with them, you're accessing their network. So I'm a good example of like, when I went to the Boston College graduate program, PhD in psychology, it was not even ranked. Like, I don't even think it was like top 100 programs. It was not a prestigious program at all. But my mentor, Lisa Philman-Barrett, was like a rising star. And, you know, she's published 2 popular press books now, and she has a TED Talk, and kind of everybody in emotion science knows her. So my kind of track record is really linked to her and not to Boston College. And actually, she's moved on from Boston College, and kind of people are always, you know, they'll ask me how it was to train at Northeastern, where she is now. And it's like, I didn't go there, because they associate me with her rather than the institution. There are exceptions to that. So some of the like Ivies and like Berkeley's psych program is very well, Michigan, Berkeley, there's a couple like large state schools that have really good psych programs and that are perceived to be really prestigious. But I would put an emphasis on finding a really good mentor rather than a program per se. I think the one thing to consider in this is that sometimes those prestigious programs and institutions have more money, and so they offer better stipends and they offer kind of more competitive packages, but not always, because Davis is, we're in the lucky position that Davis is like super up and coming, and people think of it as increasingly prestigious, and like we just bumped up a whole bunch of ranks. But I can offer packages to potential PhD students that outcompete my friends at Harvard and Yale. So in that case, that's a kind of an example of the opposite of what I just said. Do you recommend applying for both clinical and counseling programs, since clinical programs are more competitive? So if you want to work with people in a clinical setting, you have to figure out what flavor of that you're looking for, both in terms of your educational training and then like actually what the degree allows you to do. And I'm actually like not able to speak to that because I'm not a clinician. I mean, my mother is a clinician. She has a master's degree in social work, and I can tell you that, and my godmother is actually a PhD, clinical PhD. They do very similar clinical work, so there's a lot of kind of convergence in terms of what people do. But it would be best to discuss that with somebody who's clinically oriented, because I don't know the ins and outs of it, and I don't know how it's changed since I was considering clinical work myself.
Oh, may I interject real quick?
Yeah.
So folks, keep your eye on events happening in the psychology department or in Yellow Cluster Advising, because we are working on a website that'll launch in the summer that compares all counseling and therapy programs and professions. So you can read and learn more about master's programs, all sorts of them, and PsyD and PhD in clinical. And then we'll also be putting together a counseling and clinical specific career panel later in the fall or winter. So keep an eye out.
Awesome. That's great. Yeah. So, I mean, one of the points that this illustrates is that the clinical track, whether it's at a master's level or PhD level, it's like very different from the research track. And you can be in a research track and then double back and do the coursework that you need in order to become a practicing clinician. But those of us who've done the research track are really, it's a totally different discipline, and it's totally different training than the clinical track. We had another question about, so I see Lucia, you have your hand raised. I'll get to you in 1 second. Program recommendations for social psych, social cognition, or clinical psych with trauma emphasis. It really depends on what specifically you're looking to study, and what the sort of focus is, because actually social psych and social cognition is super broad. And so you would want to start with a literature search and try to drill down on what the topics are that are of most interest to you, and kind of go from there. And the clinical panel that Stacy mentioned might be a spot to ask about the trauma emphasis, because that's certainly a specialty. And my friends who work in trauma have trained all over the place. So I don't know much about the specifics in terms of programs. Lucia.
Yeah, hi. I guess something that I'm kind of struggling with, I'm a third year, so next year I'll be a fourth year. Something that I'm currently struggling with is like trying to figure out what I really want to do. Like, I feel like that's so broad, right? But like, the idea of clinical work really excites me, and there's a part of me that really wants to do that. But then I also understand that like being a full-time clinician is mentally, exhausting. And I'm currently in a research lab, and like, it's actually really exciting. Like, the idea of research and teaching as well is something that does excite me. And so I'm just kind of like caught in the middle, of kind of understanding like what should I do, what things should I get involved in, like, let's say if I wanted to take a gap year, which I think that's what I want to do, to kind of hone in and figure out like, is this going to be counseling or therapy masters, or like a master's in like general psychology and then towards like my PhD and my clinical or, something like that. Yeah, sorry, yeah, that was a lot.
So it's a really, it's a really, really great question. And we didn't talk about like gap years and stuff, but one of the ways to figure out kind of like where to head is take some time off and work in some different contexts. So if you're interested in clinical work, there are sort of research jobs that are clinically focused, which are sometimes really helpful for people to sort out what they're, what they really want to do. So for example, like working at the Mind Institute, just locally, like working at the Mind Institute and working with participants who are coming in to both participate in research studies, but they're also being treated for autism spectrum disorders, and getting a sense of like, do I like this sort of public facing work? I think, I worked in, part of the reason I decided I didn't want to be a physician is I worked in pathology, which is clinical in a different way. I did put myself through college doing autopsies, and I did a lot of like interfacing with families around this. And I just, it didn't spark joy for me. I was like good at it and I liked it and paid the bills and I found it really intriguing. But when I got to the research lab and I was able to like design and execute a study on how people's emotional experiences drove their reactivity situations, I was like excited about that in a way that was really different from when I was working in a hospital, assisting in autopsies. So, that's like a slightly different thing, but the idea is basically like trying to find something with some of the core features of the different jobs you might want to be doing and figuring out what you like and what you don't like. So gap years in terms of, and getting some experience, working as a clinical coordinator or working in, I have a friend who was just I don't mean just an administrative assistant, but she took a low-level administrative job in one of the clinics, the kidney clinic, I think, on campus, just answering phones and doing initial scheduling and stuff to get a feel for like, is this an environment that she likes? And it turned out it was. And so, she's working on a nursing degree and kind of heading in that direction. But I think that things like that can give you a real clue. I have students who, think their might be med school bound and they get trained to be phlebotomists or EMTs. That's useful. I think there's less of that in psychological science, although I have friends from college who, worked as coordinators at women's shelters and this sort of thing, which requires a lot of the same sorts of skills that clinical work requires. The flip then is that you could also focus your gap year in a really research-driven way. So we often advertise for these positions in the University of California are called junior specialists, and they're like 1 or 2 year gap year positions that allow you to work full-time in a research environment. And I think those can be really useful for figuring out whether research is the way to go. So I would say, some combination of work and maybe even volunteering, in publicly facing service roles that might give you some like clinical like experience to get a sense if you like it, if it burns you out, if it brings you joy. And those things also only will strengthen your applications because they'll allow you to write from a place of experience, even if that experience is, I really want to do X. I thought I wanted to do A, but having done it, I realized it's not for me. And now I'm going to pivot and I know I want to do B or X or whatever. So I don't think you can go wrong with a gap year, but the question is figuring out kind of how you configure it so that it really informs how you move forward.
I had posted a question about postdoc programs, but then Mahid came in with another question, so we can make Mahid's question the last question.
Okay, Mahid, how easy is it to get involved with research labs as an RA? How an application? So, do you mean as an undergraduate student research assistant or as in a paid position?
I mean, as an undergraduate, because, by the way, it's Majid, because of this pandemic, everybody's applying. And in order to have that one involved, and I realized whoever actually is going to get, RAs, it's going to be, they want it actually for, 2 quarters at least. And for example, for social cognition, for Professor Todd, he wants only 5 RAs. And right now, more than, he received, for example, more than 30 applications. So
yeah,
what should we do? Is there any way to get involved, or no? There is a kind of cap? I just want to make sure to get that one under my belt. That's what I'm trying to do.
Yeah, it's a really good question, and COVID has like totally changed things. And one of the conversations we had in my lab as we were reviewing graduate student applications this year was like, if people don't have research experience, do we count that against them? Or like, how do we configure that in our expectations? And I think that will be a conversation we have again. And because actually, when we were reviewing applications in January, February, like it was different. I mean, it was not, we thought we might be out of this situation. So I would say, apply to as many different options, apply for as many different options and opportunities as possible. It may be that you're able to land a research experience in a group that you wouldn't necessarily think of or wouldn't be a top of your list. I know that we're in a similar situation. So my lab has actually been totally closed to undergrads because of the biosafety, like monkeys can get COVID. I still get contacted a bunch. We just started integrating students remotely, kind of slowly, because there's so much demand, and we'll open in the summer. And I don't know how, or we hope to open in the summer, and I don't actually know how we'll handle applications and so on. But we're a big group, right? And so during the non-pandemic times, we have 25 or 30 students working with us typically, because I have 5 graduate students and a postdoc and project scientist. And so, not that you want to be working with monkeys, but there may be other groups where there are more people, where they're in a position to kind of like scale up a little bit. I think all faculty recognize that this is a thing, and that we need to address it somehow. So yeah, I think putting feelers out to a lot of different faculty, even if they do things that are not like real consistent with where you think you want to go, because just being in the research environment is super useful for writing personal essays, like figuring out kind of how you think about science, and they can be rewarding experiences even if it's not the specific topic that you want to study. So I would start there, kind of a broader search. And also know that like the situation is constantly changing. So we just got indication that we can like ramp up. I have a human lab too, and we just started thinking about like, what does that look like for the fall? And we hadn't until we got that word yesterday, I think it was. So this is kind of a constantly changing target.
I'd also like to,
not super helpful, but
oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
I'd also like to point out that faculty often ask advising to put out an advertisement in the newsletter to students that goes out every single Thursday. So for example, Dr. Hastings emailed me today saying, hey, we're hiring, put an advertisement in the newsletter. So please check the newsletter every week that comes to your inbox. And then also keep in mind that like there are probably more than 50 labs in psychology or associated with psychology that our students work in. And you can use the general research link that I put in the chat in order to browse those. And you can use a generalized research application, or you can apply for 3 labs at a time. But you can certainly apply directly through a lab website like Dr. Bliss-Moreau showed you.
And most of us are happy to get cold emails too. So even if the response is we're not taking students right now, what I'm able to tell people when I respond is that I hope the situation will be different in the middle of the summer, and that will allow us to plan for fall. So to be in touch in the middle of the summer. And so that can help kind of orient your thinking in terms of when to get us affiliated with a lab.
Well, thank you so much.
Yeah, you're very welcome. Well, thanks everybody for coming, and the slides will be available. Typically, I would say I'm happy to answer questions by email, but given the way the term has wrapped up, if you email me, it could be weeks before I respond, because we're trying to get a class wrapped up and grants out, and my graduate students through different hoops all during the pandemic. So feel free to reach out, but just be patient if it takes me a little while, because I need to wrap the term up before I dig into my email inbox. Good luck wrapping up week 10. You've survived, and good luck with finals, everybody.